Hello and welcome back to Climbing Mount Sophia. Today's conversation is with Cameron Hicks and Gage Murphy. Gage has been on the channel before. Cameron, this is his first time. We all three met at the Quest for a Spiritual Home conference in Chino, California in May, and had some wonderful conversations there. This conversation is in many ways a continuation of those, as well as just where we find ourselves in the journey since then. So I hope you enjoy. Okay. Yeah, but don't worry about it. That way it's better.
Yeah,
there's a weird thing that happens with recording and trying to I don't know.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because that aspect of it is a little causes a little bit of anxiety, right? And it blocks it completely. So I can imagine trying to do the formal interview process of it. It can clog you up quite a bit. I watched just the intro to your last conversation with Christopher and just how you just flowed right into it and stuck the intro at the beginning. It helps. I could see.
Yeah, man, this summer I've seriously considered just sort of not ditching the YouTube channel, but just stop making new videos. And I sort of didn't all summer, partly because I was busy, partly because I was just sort of I don't know, lost the fire for it a little bit. And I feel like it's coming back around now to some degree, but a bit more mature. I think it's just sort of does this.
Yeah, right. Definitely.
But you were asking about fatherhood. It's like, man, my daughter's 10 months now, and she's to the stage where oh man, she's so fun. She's coming over to get hugs and kisses now, and just she's almost talking. She's talking enough that we can understand. She can understand everything you say.
Right.
And so it's super fun.
That's awesome. That's super exciting, Ken.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe it's just the entire first year, but I think a little bit of the darkness of the heaviness of it, man. The first year of having a child is crazy. I don't know if it's like this for everybody, but it's hard.
Yeah. Just stressful, just the amount of time and commitment to.
Yeah, and just you get radically decentered. If I think if you do it, and I'm sort of live my life as making everything sort of an existential challenge to turn everything, but man, you get so just decentered. It's my there's something that's more relevant to me than me.
Right.
And if you take that really seriously,
right. Yeah. It's kind of maybe the vertigo of freedom you're talking about at the beginning of that podcast with Christopher. Just something brings a whole lot of entropy where it throws off your center of gravity. And even if it's something fantastic and great, it still takes some getting used to say the least, I guess, huh?
Yeah. And that's if you watch that conversation with Chris, that was a lot of sort of the struggles that I've had in the past year were sort of underlying that whole conversation. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like when I talk to Chris, it's like getting a free therapy session because he's just he's so just the way he is.
It's pretty incredible. I haven't listened to him too much. I mean, let's say maybe 2 or 3 podcasts. But once I listen to him, this is like art almost. The way he speaks is incredible. I think one of the first times I saw him was in the Awakening to a Meaning Crisis video, right? He just looked maybe a little nervous there, right? He looked like a young student of John for sure, right? And, so I was like, oh, that's cool, bringing him on and stuff. And it wasn't until much later that I revisited him, and I was blown away. And listening to his dialogues is a treat because it's like art to me, listening to it, right? It's so easy to get lost in it. It's one of those things where how you explained it at the conference, it's like the words fall away. It's not the words anymore, right? It's something past that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, speaking of which, your recent circling with that you posted, Ken, I thought was such a great example, and I feel like that's a real treat for people to see who haven't actually taken part in the classes. I wanted to. They're always falling on times where I'm busy, and so I'm just waiting for that one weekend where I'm like, okay, this is the one I'm jumping in. But it was really I was really following the thread and felt like I was doing dishes and I'm doing all these things and like I lost my whole sense of like presence as I'm kind of following where you guys were going. And I was like sucked up into the circle, even though I'm kind of not a part of it. And it was a really cool experience. I definitely started to like you guys were making all these crazy connections at the end and you were just like kind of shouting them out. And like I was having, although it was in my own head, I was making a lot of connections too, where it's like compassion. I was just kind of like, oh, compassion in the beginning, just feels so deadened from our society. And then all of a sudden it's like the most alive thing. So yeah, that was a treat.
I'm glad. I mean, that's like, first of all, yeah, the attempting to give people a taste, because I think a lot of people, hear about John's ecology of practices that he talks about, or someone in the space adjacent, an ecology of practice that demands some level of discipline and rigor, and they get sort of like, is it really this hard? Do I have to do all this stuff? And it's like, I mean, you can look at it that way, sure, but if you see what happens, and especially if you feel what happens, especially, man, if you put it all together in a good dialectic, it's like it's one of the most powerful mystical sort of experiences that I've ever had. Is not necessarily, I mean, that one on compassion was amazing, but just in every time I've done it with people who are present and really understand how to sort of get out of their own way in terms of their individualistic, idiosyncratic narrative. They can sort of put that aside and legitimately turn their awareness, like cooperate their awareness together towards a specific virtue, and then just allow it to manifest. It's incredible, because I mean, it's like every time I thought I had any idea what a virtue was, a particular one, like you do a dialectic on it, and you
Right.
so yeah, I'm glad you felt that way, and I hope that it does inspire more people to get involved, because it's powerful.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to learn more about the dialectic practice. There's like this formal element to it that I'm a complete novice to. I mean, I don't know if there's access to like materials online, or if it's something where I know there's certain conferences with Guy Sinstock, right? Where
Yeah.
he's teaching it. But yeah, it's something I've rarely looked into, but it's something where if I'm picking up on what it is, that cascade of insight that like Gage is talking about, where it reaches through the screen. You're not a part of that dialogos, and I know that has a mystical element. Whereas if you're not there, it's not quite the same thing. But it's crazy how it can reach through the screen and affect the person watching. And from just any podcaster, you see them fall into it, to more ones where there's a intent behind pointing at a certain virtue and making it happen. It's really powerful, and it's surprising. I think it's like shocked people, our whole culture out wide at some level. Like, I don't think we knew that long form podcasts could have that effect. And just one thing I've noticed over like the past 5 years, just watching, going down the Peterson rabbit hole and then into Vervaeke, etc., is I've started to, in my own speech, my own articulation, it's affected me an insane amount. And I've just thought, like, what an insane gift to be able to imitate these people. Like, these can be the people I learned to imitate from. Because as kids, of course, you have a father and a mother and teachers around you where you're picking up on those idiosyncratic ways of speaking and taking them into yourself. But to get to have those examples and grow off of them is really special. It's affected me a lot, I've noticed.
Yeah, I think speaking well. I mean, imagine a world if we generally spoke with the depth of intention that is required to even follow someone like Peterson or Vervaeke. There's an intentionality underlying your entire posture towards words and articulation and how you hold yourself. There's this great, and I ran across this great thing on it was a short Twitter thread, I think. A guy was talking about how there's sorts of two ways, and he cited a study, but I didn't like many things. I probably should have like actually read it, but I didn't. I just read his thread, but it was basically saying there's two types of people in terms of how they relate to their own use of language. And for the majority of people, they actually use language and will say certain words not because of what each word actually means, but because for them, it's simply a signifier of what type of person they are. So it's purely a social status in terms of what words you use in your vocabulary, and especially to describe positions you hold in terms of opinions. It has nothing to do with the actual meaning and content of the propositions underneath. And then obviously, of course, the second category is people who actually are carefully attempting to place forward a meaning by means of representation.
Right. Well, it's interesting. That makes me think of when in the Republic, when, they're trying to define justice, and the only way to define justice is kind of like, well, I'm going to tell you something that it isn't quite exactly like, and it's grabbing all these different elements, and then all of a sudden, like, the Geist of justice kind of emerges out of the dialogue, and it seems like that is more similar to the second one in which you're talking about, where in order to talk about things, like there was, I don't know, somebody, I don't even really know him, but was posted on Twitter and was just kind of like talking about how when he talks to theologians or stuff like that, or people, they always talk about how theology, and like they just say that it's paradoxical and stuff like that. And he was like getting all upset. He's like, these people don't have any arguments for anything. It's all nonsense. Like it was just like a ramble thread. And normally I kind of just scroll through those. I was thinking about it for a second, and like I kind of wanted to engage in a conversation about it, because so I just like replied and was like, I think theology has to be paradoxical, and that's a good thing. And just said like, hey, if you want to chat about it, DM me, because like I'm not gonna have a conversation on the Twitter thread about it back and forth, because those don't go anywhere. Because I think the things that are most real are held in tension between things that are less real in some sense. So there's like a tension between things, and then something higher above it emerges in the tension. And so to talk about something like theology without paradox seems a little ridiculous to me, even though I can understand people's frustration when especially when they feel like people are kind of talking around the bush from their perspective. But once you start to understand, at least someone who's truly doing it in the right way, what they're trying to do, like the way Socrates doesn't just try and provide an answer, but he's trying to be a midwife in some sense. You realize that the things that emerge that are most profound, you can't just say them, because then that's to grab at them and think you've understood them. It's only once you realize they can't be grabbed at that they can be grabbed at. And it's like this weird paradox in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's like, I mean, I think what you see, and what I really liked about reading this Schindler's book, Critique of Impure Reason, is seeing like how words have to be like embodied, right? That's what it is. Like they have to be, and then transparent in some way. Like that has to lead to something beyond themselves and back in. And then in some sense, they're always going to be context based and then run into paradox if you abstract them out and take them into that more formal realm, right? But when it's about, yeah, the embodiment and embedding them inside of a context that you do with language that truly gives it its life and its meaning back, right? But yeah, that book, like that's really been, I guess, the main thing on my mind recently is looking at that, and then McGilchrist's work in combination with that, kind of the two ways we can attend to the world, and how one is very much that way to try to like you're saying, Gage, like grab the words, right? And just pin them under you and see them that way. Whereas another way to do it is to see them inside of their context and to give them the full life of kind of making the words transparent and looking beyond them. But yeah, that's really been on my mind.
Yeah, I think Karen Wong is doing a McGilchrist Schindler conversation here soon, so that'll be a fun one, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
That's exciting to hear, because yeah, I was like, I've been having that conversation in my head. So wow, to actually have it, that would be crazy. But yeah, I mean, that, like, going into that for a second, if that's all right. Like, there's a clear, this is why I'd be so excited to hear them talk, because there's like a clear contradiction at some level, or a sticking point between the two thinkers, I guess. Is McGilchrist, at least a master and his emissary, really points to Plato as the reason for dualism in the West, and points to his philosophy as what led to this topsy-turvy world of too much of a left hemisphere world, as it were, too much of things being codified, right? So even though he holds that view, there's so much similarity between the two thinkers and the way they talk about it, like the absolute and the relative. But for Schindler, the absolute being something that is beyond grasp, right? I don't know. In that sense, I see so much similarity between the thinkers, but at some superficial level, they look like they disagree. It's interesting.
Yeah, and that the absolute has to include the relative.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And it's that thought that reminds me of the master and his emissary. Like, right, the whole point of that little story is that it's when the relative, or in this case, like the emissary, thinks it's absolute, right?
Yeah.
That things get topsy-turvy. But when it's in right proportion, where when, say, the right hemisphere can be the master, right, and the left hemisphere does its emissary role, it can include that relative space, and it in that sense it's in proper relationship and everything's working correctly. But when things get flipped the other way around, right, when the relative tries to be the absolute, that's when things start to get in trouble.
Well, it seems like I'd be interested to know McGilchrist's background with the Platonic corpus, because I know like Schindler's ideas are very radical as far as looking at the history of Neoplatonism, in the sense that he's very much, I felt like, played a part in ushering this new wave of Neoplatonism in terms of seeing it in a way that a lot of people who studied Plato, historically, especially, I mean, even in great institutions throughout the West, which McGilchrist probably did, would have gotten maybe a very different education on Plato. And that may have affected his reading of Plato. And that's not really even a negative, like that's just the reality of it. And so that's kind of what makes Schindler's work and others around him in that same kind of new wave so radical, is because I think a lot of people feel the same way, Cameron, like that Plato is somewhat responsible for that dualism. And I kind of had some questions about that as well, like in my, because like I'd read some of Plato quite a bit before reading Schindler's book, and all of a sudden, like, a lot of questions that like kind of lingered for me, like I was starting to see them more clearly, and was starting to kind of figure out what Plato was doing at a different level, and that really opened up a lot for me, because I think a problem that is definitely one that affects everyone in terms of their views about things, even in this little corner, is like having to do with that dualism. And Ken, I know you've talked about it on your channel before and stuff like that. And it's not quite clear who to like lay the problem, like where the problem originates. But there's part of me that feels this kind of going off a little bit, but part of me feels like the dualism is inevitable, and that kind of trying to find the source of the blame, where we started to like, oh, that's where things started to go wrong, whether you blame it at Plato in the beginning or you try to blame it at Descartes, like in order for you to make sense of things again in like a re-embodied way. Things have to go from being one to two before they can become one again. And I feel like the embracing of that on the historical philosophical level is a really, really important thing for us. Like there's a lot of impatience I sense in philosophy and theology about not understanding how this foregoing of the human consciousness is a thousands-year process of man understanding their relationship with God, and that the split is like, I know in I don't know how familiar you are with Barfield, but like Barfield very much talks about this original participation where which what you could call maybe like the ancients were a part of, and then all of a sudden through the consciousness, like consciousness implies duality because you're inherent the essential being and the existential being separate, and like you can't start to look at things in a meta level without that happening. But I think it's, I don't know, I have a lot of faith that we're moving towards a re-embodiment, and it's like a return to the garden, having now known what it's like to not be in it. And I think that's in some sense like that's a big part of God's plan. I don't know if any of that tracks for you guys, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Plato's been disastrously misunderstood by most in the West anyway. Because they're like, I don't think you can understand Plato if you don't understand sort of the mystical to start with. Like if you don't already have a bit of a sense of non-duality, like I didn't come to Plato until after I had been exposed to Hinduism, Buddhism, type things first. So I already sort of had this sense about what non-duality was like. I'd already had like some pretty crazy experiences in meditation. So the possibility of sort of looking through words and having, you know, the words and the dialogue being a stage to play out something rather than a system of propositions. Like I don't see Plato trying to build a system at all. I see Plato just trying to describe. And it's like, as soon as it's like if you're already playing from the level of the relative needing to be absolute, you're going to misread Plato.
Right.
And I think this is why like Neoplatonism and Christianity are like, I mean, for me, they're actually inseparable. Like I can't separate in my mind Christianity and Neoplatonism, because I don't think there is another ontological structure that makes sense of Christianity than Neoplatonism. Partially because Neoplatonism, I'm pretty well convinced it's the only one that makes sense of how the world actually lays itself out. But also, I think that the incarnational aspect of Christianity and the incarnational aspect of Christ is the thing that makes Neoplatonic life a viable option, not simply on the individual level, but especially on a higher collective sort of level, where you don't, like one of the charges that gets leveled against Neoplatonism is that it's the the philosophical religion of the elites, right? Because unless you can grok Plato, then there's not much, you can't have much of it. Right. But like once you have the incarnation, once you have Christ, Jesus, then you have like you can't do the two worlds mythology anymore. It's like, it's so funny to me that Christianity, or what is called Christianity, is so bent on this two worlds mythology thing, because it's how do you get that? You can't play that game if you're gonna actually buy the incarnation, and especially if you're gonna buy the resurrection. And so like if you put those two together, it's like, well, then you actually have a way to live within a Neoplatonic way of life, and you're not going to be chasing a sort of Gnostic abandonment of limitation.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, it's Neo and Trinity that is the way out of the Matrix, their relationship. So I I agree with you. They're inseparable because they're wedded together, and through their wedding is the way out of, like, because you can in some sense think about the Matrix as a two worlds mythology because of the separation, right? Like in terms of these two realms. And so it's like their wedding together is the way out of it. And I thought, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is what like all the great mythologies show at the beginning of time is this dualism that occurs, like the fall, right? And it's the fall out of that like Ouroboros state of just being one with nature. But then there's a sense that it's necessary too, right? And then it seems the call is to join that back together. And I think that's where it's really important to understand how the West misunderstood Plato. I mean, growing up, right? Yeah, you learn about Plato and you learn about climbing out of the cave, right? The matrix, taking the red pill. But what it has this intent, well, it's about abstraction, is how you learn about it. I mean, that's how I learned about it in school. And abstraction, then, right? So when I'm reading McGilchrist, I'm learning about Plato. I think abstraction, that's this left hemisphere world, right? Where you're taking something that needs to be embodied and relative to its context and all this stuff, and you need to abstract it out to some absolute, right? And that absolute is like the idea of a cup, right? And that cup that is then abstracted out is the proposition that Plato puts as ontologically primary. And that just seems so wrong to me, right? It's like, I didn't like that idea. I wanted things to be embodied and living and not some dead realm where you have to pull things out. But once I started to really understand what a gestalt was, right? That's the idea that Plato is trying to get at with the absolute, is it's the thing that can stitch everything together and not leave things like bits and pieces lying around, and it stitches it and brings it together. And for him to have, I guess, the good as either like the highest value in that gestalt, the thing that can never be reached, or it's the bridge that can help you kind of see the gestalt, right? But that's like a beautiful idea, and it starts to then feel much more alive and much more in this realm of what McGilchrist describes the right hemisphere and how it attends to be able to stitch things together. So I think that mistake right there, to see that how we view abstraction and how that started to lead to a sort of like reductionism in the West, and also led to, I think, like a totalitarian satanic mindset, was a really dangerous shift that occurred and led to like that split.
Right. I think what's interesting to me about it is I think that this split like exists experientially, and what part of what like a lot of the religious traditions I think are trying to do, and like kind of Ken, you were alluding to this, is like that, okay, when you take the incarnation of Christ and his death and resurrection, like you can't you can't believe that the two worlds mythology is the way it is ultimately when you see what's going on there in that symbol. But at the same time, it affirms the experience of the two worlds mythology, which I find really powerful about it. And I find, because there, and I think that's where things got so confused with heaven and hell. And like, it's, there has to be an affirmation of where we got in our consciousness about separating things, right? While also maintaining that it's somewhat illusory that things are in a two worlds mythology. And if you don't strike that tension right, then it doesn't land and connect with people in an embodied way, because it's like whatever it is the fall meant, the fall is very connected with this idea of disconnection, and like a need to resolve the essential and the existential selves. And so it seems to me like whatever pursuit is involved in that process, which I believe Plato's works are like centrally about that. And that's why, I think even like there's a section in Schindler's book about him addressing the kind of the art problem in Plato's Republic in book 10, and how like Plato's using like, narrative, and he's using all these like artistic types of ways to kind of interact with his arguments and stuff throughout the entire Republic, and then he kind of just says, he just dismantles art in one section of it. And I think part of that is he's trying to show that the way out of it has to affirm that aspect. It has to affirm the experience of the duality while also trying to expose it as illusory and trying to usher forth a return to, I don't know, a re-embodiment of singularity in those two things. And I think that is associated with a lot of the reason that everything kind of adopted a two worlds mythology, even things that were never intended to be. You even see its influences in Eastern things. I think, it's like the Tao is not represented by what the Tao is. The Tao is just represented by the duality. Because, you know what I mean? The Tao is affirmed through the representation of the duality. But when you have understood the duality, you understand that it's an illusion to the singularity behind it. But you can't show the singularity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It can only be shown through the duality, because the duality is the appearance. It's the image of the singularity. And I feel like that's what Christ embodies really well as well.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I'm hearing something here. Are you making a distinction between the felt, the sort of phenomenological experience of a dualistic reality versus a two worlds mythology, and trying to point toward the second as being a product of the first, but the second being maybe ultimately a parasite, and the first needing to be affirmed insofar as it leads us towards the non-dual?
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Thanks for clarifying that. Like,
okay,
you kind of took a lot of what I was going and you made it kind of more succinct. So I appreciate that. Yeah, no, that's definitely associated with, and I think the idea of the imaginal is wrapped up in that. Like the idea that the imaginal, like if we think about something like angels or demons, right, which kind of, they assume a two worlds mythology on the surface. But if you understand what the imaginal is, then you actually see how a proper understanding of the angelic realm is not a two worlds mythology. Does that kind of make sense?
Totally. And like you sort of have to, like, it's funny, like once you drop out of the mythology of it, which sort of needs it to be real in the way that this lived experience is real, right. Let's say higher levels. It gets way different, right? Because you can sort of see them symbolically. Like once you just understand how to think symbolically, and that a symbol is a real thing that might not exist in the same way that like this material exists, but it has real properties that have real causal impact, and even can be, and all the stuff about collective intelligence and all those kinds of things. Like you don't need a two worlds mythology to explain or to notice the fact that entire groups of people doubt forces that no one of them can control or are responsible for, that are either disastrously evil or wonderfully good.
Right. And I think people tend to take one of two stances on the issue of what you're describing. Is they want to make the angelic, they want to make it imaginary, or they want to make it material in some sense. I mean, they'll literally say it's immaterial, but what they mean is that it's material. And so it's that wrong relationship with the imaginal that causes the issue of starting to see things in a two worlds mythology, and it's where all the disagreement gets all muddled together, because when you don't, it's why it's very important to say, you can't just say demons, well, demons are just these four. Like, as soon as you start to say just, you've just reduced it. You're now, like, you know what I mean, you're now into materialism. And as soon as you say like demons, like, and you start having this kind of not like non-imaginal relationship with it, where you start to, I don't even know the right words to describe it, but it's associated with kind of a literal fanaticism about them, then you've lost it as well. And the reason, like, I think one of the problems that is especially going on right now, which this is like good work, is to try and make sense of all of these spiritual realities and stuff that have been realized for the ancients. But I see a lot of people wanting to do the just, and it's like, okay, the forces we're talking about are best categorized as angels and demons, possibly. And I don't mean literally angels and demons, because it depends on what those words are cross culturally. I'm not like saying about it in a Western centric way, but the way the ancients talked about it is they made those forces alive in a way that they weren't literal, but they weren't reduced. And that, I believe, is the proper relationship between understanding those forces and their impact on people in the world. It maintains that tension. And I think that's the same case for even something like God, is that God only started to make sense to me once I started to understand what the imaginal was. And that's such a cool thing.
Yeah.
It really changed my relationship with God and with Christianity on a tremendous way.
So that's like having the proper tension, right, between emergence and emanation. And I think, the problem, it's almost like when people in a left hemisphere fashion try to too quickly get to the one, right? And then it ends up in reductionism, where they're trying to take either that spirit realm of that turns into just abstract propositions, right? And you try to make that the only thing that's real, or you look deep into the material and end up falling into the same trap and just reducing down to what you can see, right? Rather than holding the proper tension, the emanation of that more spirit realm, right? The collective intelligence and all the I guess gestalts and constraints that you can then start to map the world through, but you also let that interact with the potential of material, and not trying to too quickly clamp down and create like a kind of a reductionist theory.
Well, I think if one of the things that's I was thinking when you were talking about that, Gage, is that both sides of the failure, whether you're reducing it to material, sort of, I guess the materialist side to me tends to be sort of mocking a primitive,
right,
just misunderstanding,
right.
That's what they think is necessary. And then the opposite, the full-on acceptance of a literal fantasy is maybe engaging in, I don't want to go there what all they're doing, but either way, you're doing this thing. There's this like underlying presupposition to me that understands what it means to be human as to be sort of that individual unmoved mover of will, and that because that's what it means to be human, that's the highest level of agency there is. So every other level of agency has to fit within that box. So we reduce God to a man, we reduce angels to really good men, and demons to really, really bad men with special superpowers, basically, in the imaginary sense. And then if you're a materialist, you're just saying, well, human beings are, of course, on top, and they just didn't know what they were talking about for a long time, but everything is just bumpation otherwise.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think part of what's going on also is like there's this issue where there's a misunderstanding about the genuinity that existed in the way primitive people thought. Like, we live in the I forgot what Verkviki calls it. It's not the age of skepticism. It's like a um I forgot what it's called. Hermeneutics of suspicion. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's I mean, I don't know this, so but it's like if you read something that's really old, you get a sense of what's going on there. Like the level of consciousness that they're existing at can't allow for something like the way we are now, and that we can be so like meta about things, and like it's a satire of this, and like we go so many layers deep. I mean, all of our art is just a satire on a satire on a satire on a satire. Like these these old works, they're real. Like there's no like meta commenting on anything else. This is a genuine experience. And so in some sense, superstition and like the fantastical element of demons isn't even possible, which is very interesting because that's who we assign, like, oh, it was the primitives that thought these things. It's like, no, superstition exists for people that believe it like that now. And for what we saw that happened at the end of the Middle Ages, where a strict literalism happened and everything going on with the Protestant Reformation and all these types of movements and witch burnings, it's because all of that understanding of the imaginal started to collapse. And it was like, you take a side. What are you? Are you going to remain loyal to the fantastical, or are you going to become enlightened to the materialistic? And the imaginal just collapsed. And what, although I don't like, I in no way believe that there needs to be a move backward, because I don't any intention to do that, I think, is misguided, and I think there's a process going on here that we have to kind of undergo. But I really like learn a lot from reading really old things, because I can feel it, the genuinity of these experiences, and they can't think of demons as fantastical like that. The demons are there, right? They don't like, there's the demon. They see the demon in the way that we can't even see them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They don't see them in a literal way, in the way that we think about it fantastically, but it's it's one. That whole problem is at one. And it's like, I'm envious of them that they are able to see the world in such an embodied, real way that incorporates the symbolic in the way that you were talking about, where the material and the meaning aren't separate categories; they're the same thing.
Yeah.
That's at least my reading of it.
I mean, yeah, Gage, I think this goes back to something that me and you really found in common at the conference, is like a frustration with just how codified the world feels, how everything just feels kind of dead, right?
Mm.
And part of the trick, right? Don't want to call it a trick, but the way to for the world to come back to life again, right, is to like, you don't, it's to stop looking at things and just start looking through them again, right? And using these things that we now think as like fantastical, right, that imaginal realm, as you're not looking at them as something, another piece of material to dissect and investigate, but they're rather a way to, I get, to frame your world, right, but to help you see more. Like that's what it does. It helps you break that codified image or object, right, that looks so objective, and it's an object and it's out there. But when you start to see through that imaginal realm, the world lives again, right? And I think that's something akin to, that's how I picture, right, the ancients, I guess, living when it's in that state where that flow, that channel, right, maybe like the thing that just leads you back into reality was very present for them, I guess. If you read someone like Heraclitus, it just seems like that. And that's why, like, McGilchrist's favorite philosopher, as he says, is Heraclitus for this reason. And from my reading, it seems like then he despises Plato because he's like, that's what codified the world. But maybe there's an inevitability, right, to that split that happened away from just the oneness that Heraclitus had, but then a call to perform some kind of proper tension again to get back inside of the world from like a new angle. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was good.
When it comes to this, like seeing through of reality, like, do you guys have, whether it's practices that you do routinely or just maybe phenomenologically, like, have you had the feeling where you sort of toggle between those two modes of being, right? Like where you're in one where the world is a set of objects with which you're interacting, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a world in which things are connected and you can see through them to their greater meaning and connection beyond. Like, I'm just curious to make it a little more personal and existential.
Yeah, I'd say like I've been able to invoke it, not like it's hard to do. Where it's happened for me is when I meditate. For the longest I've been able to keep doing it daily was like 6 months. And towards the end of that period, I came out of the practice, and it's something I learned from Vervaeke to have an object, right? I use this little glass frog that's been in my family's house forever. And I love looking at that frog. Like as a kid, I loved looking at it because it's just got some colors in it. And I mean, when you're a kid, that's easy to do. That's the fun thing about being a kid, the novelty of everything. And they're not so solidified yet. So it kind of had that nostalgic feeling to it, right? Which was probably the reason I gravitated towards it. Plus the Neoplatonic symbol of the frog that Vervaeke talks about. So I'm like, this is quite the object, right, to perform this on. And after meditating and doing like Alexio Divina, to spend time once you're in that more fluid state, I don't quite know how to put it, right? But then and then staring at the frog. And are you guys familiar with the Necker cube? That psychological experiment, right? Or just phenomenon. So it's just a two-dimensional cube that you can switch the framing of it, right? You can see the face, right? It's that kind of thing, right? Just neurologically speaking, that it looks like is what's going on, and it's that similar feeling, but not quite just so like you're in a museum. Oh, whoa! It's switching perspectives. It's a little bit more mystical, right? You start to see just different. Your salience landscape is switching around. Different things are popping forward, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of an isolated practice where it comes out. Then in more just embodied activities, I surf and rock climb. I can feel a similar state. It's harder to name how objects seem more transparent. That's probably the best example of like a way it's happening. But I've stopped meditating all summer for, work and whatnot, all the excuses, and now that's gone away, right? So I feel it more than ever, that annoyance at how solidified the world can feel.
It's a call to get back meditating. Yeah. I would say for me, like, I find often at a moment of crisis, either in myself or in someone that I care deeply about, like my wife or a member of my family or a friend, that I find like you were saying, we were just talking about it in the abstract, but I find like there starts to be a collapsing between like, okay, this is a realized instance of like, it gives, although it obviously is existing all the time, all around, like the crisis situation elevates to a point where if you really truly want to engage with this crisis and kind of trying to find the most wise way out of it and way to, it's like you have to start to view it in that way, to kind of get the sense of things, because it's like a crisis was where all the forces kind of like culminate, and when you can kind of see what, I guess, all right, to use like a proper example is like, there's like, I was having to make a really hard decision about something, and it kind of like had a lot of imminence to it. And like I felt very dragged in different directions and stuff like that. Um, and I felt like in a crisis, like there's such just a like an embodied feeling to try and grab at things. Um, like and try and really like because you feel desperate, you know what I mean? Like you're like drowning in a situation and like I don't know, it's just like it's like the way people described, people who have gone through intense suffering or like in the concentration camps, like really just becomes about survival and like you're really just trying to grab at anything and then like I think what you were saying, Cameron, in terms of like how meditation can actually like you can experience what you're saying in meditation, but how like meditation, like what it's teaching you to do, how that can like translate into like the crises of life is really interesting to me because like it's like training yourself how to look at things the way you do when you're meditating in a situation where the stakes are high in an actual like in personal crisis and stuff like that. And like I don't know, I'm not very good at it because it's like I but it's like the times where I've been able to see it and like all of a sudden like the way out emerges. And it's like this really cool thing where you don't fall for any of the traps because there's all these traps set out every way. And it's like you see something. It very much reminds me of the story of Joseph, where he's just constantly being trapped throughout the entire narrative, right? And like, but like he constantly keeps his focus on God, and that's almost that idea of being able to see through things to see what they really are. And he keeps like somehow getting his way out of the traps because of that. And I think like David does that too in his situation with Saul. Like, what's the way out of this situation? Like, I mean, I'm the rightful king. Do I kill Saul? But then, like, it's this idea of having to not fall for any of the traps. And I feel like, man, being able to learn how to do that, like, that's what I feel like what we're talking about and like how meditation and stuff like that. If you can figure out how to do that in your own life and like be a guide for people to do that in their own lives, so many problems are solved from that because some of the worst evil, even if it's not like an intentional evil, you know what I mean? Even if it has like an affected evil, comes from people falling for the traps in those moments of crisis. And like, it's no wonder, right? It's very hard to see things what they are, to take yourself out of the subjectivity of wanting to grab at everything, and then to see things as they are, and then be like, wow, like, I don't know, it's a cool experience. One I
Yeah.
want to have more of.
I think, I mean, thank you both for sharing. And I think both of those are, I think those are two profound aspects of it because I think, and you really put your finger on it there, Gage. I think really what we're talking about here is wisdom, as like properly speaking, as a virtue, at least an aspect of it, which is to come into connection with reality such that it does open up. And you can get there simply by the intentionality, like you were talking about, Cameron, or you can find yourself there, right, because of the coalescence of myriad energies that have borne down upon you.
Right.
But either way, the same sort of thing seems to be happening that you're both describing, which is I almost get the sense that it's like this kind of gathering together of yourself such that you can see things as they really are, but in a way that's not simply how it's relevant to you, but how it just is. It's like that. Like, I think this is, now I'm sort of bringing my own experience in here. It feels like when there's an appropriate gathering together of the self and an acknowledgement of whatever, of reality over and against the self, and then sort of an acknowledgement that the self is also just embedded in that reality, that then you can sort of open up to just reality being what it is.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that. I think thinking about that in terms of how the self comes together as opposed to it being kind of split and torn in all these types of directions. So not only that's a cool element that you added to it, because not only are you like trying to solve a problem in the world and prevent kind of evil and sin from, cursing the world around you, you're actually like rebuilding yourself. And you are actually not only getting to know how to solve a problem, but you're getting to know you, because you're starting to see yourself not from, I don't know, you're starting to see yourself how you really are. And then I think that process ends up becoming cyclical, because then to see who you really are, then you then, because that insight is greater, then that comes with you into the next moment of decision, and it builds on itself in a really like profound way if you continue to follow it.
Yeah. This is hitting really hard because like this is 5 years ago. My father died, but like this is one of the most, and it was so weird to me at the time, like how cohesive I felt after it happened, how clearly things looked. Um, and I mean, tragedy hits people in different ways, and like the context around it made it to where it wasn't a surprise, which is probably part of it. But then there's just that it happened, right? And when that happened, that cohesiveness that you're describing, that you feel of like the self is in a just right relationship to the reality around you. It was like it was surreal, and it was the exact opposite of what I thought would happen. I thought there would be kind of a fracturing. um I don't know, yeah, that hit pretty hard.
Mm. Wow. Well, yeah, first of all, thanks for sharing that. Do you feel like, I mean, I guess I just want to hear more about that. Like, you anticipated it to be fracturing, but then you actually found yourself pulled together through a tragedy that was deeply, deeply significant to you.
Yeah, like there's something, I guess maybe it gets back to like, which is why it might hit everybody different. Like when you're talking about tragedy, Gage, like there's something to where when you enter um that space of like catastrophe, and so in this case my dad dying, there's something that just drops out of existence that you had a mold of, and everything had its place, right? And that felt like stability, and in some sense it was, right? But it's that stability that, if left alone to think that that's reality, all those pieces of stability and that itself is what's real, that it it starts to feel dead, right? Like I have the model of my dad, the model of my mom, and I was very much in a time in my life where it just felt like that everything was moving unconscious, and I was just kind of a piece of that. Um,
Mm.
and then when he dropped out, it's that frame breaking that occurs, right? Because then it's a cascade of like that. To put it too abstractly, is like the model of my dad died, right? Like that thing I had to interact with just died, and that cascade of like frame break hit me at such a moment, which is a blessing, that then something more real emerged behind it, right? It didn't
Mm,
feel like just chaos and entropy. Rather, it
mm,
felt like after that I could see clearly, and everything clicked.
mm.
Um,
So
and at that time,
when everything
go ahead.
broke, you landed in yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And it's that weird like paradox again, where like the cohesiveness, I felt the cohesiveness of myself with my dad still around and everything, and you think that is reality and that's the most real, and you're scared to have any of that be broken, because then you think, right, everything's just going to be chaos under that, so you're happy with the stability. But when that breaks, you fall into something more real and more cohesive that holds you. And I think that's the good, right? Like that's how I understand it, is it's that intelligibility that doesn't need you to grasp and click every little piece together. It's rather a letting go that lets things like properly. gestalt together.
It's really
Wow.
profound, Cameron.
And that's been, I mean, probably the core of the journey for my past 5 years has been that mystery, right? Because when that happens, it's like you can't make sense of it, right?
Mhm.
It's especially at the time of it happening. And then so yeah, it's been like a huge, I guess, like thread.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's an argument from a place, right? And an experience that's, I mean, in some sense, the death of your father is a maximal event for a particular archetype of experience. So that's a powerful argument. I wonder, like, because not everyone has this kind of experience when their father passes, right? Probably for more people than for probably the majority of people, it's a disintegrating experience.
Hmm.
It seems to be. If you think that's true, I don't want to just assert that. If you think that's a fair point, what do you think made it available to you? Like, what was it that allowed it to be that way for you?
Well, yeah, to acknowledge the first point, I think you're right. And that's what was so shocking to me, especially shortly before my dad died, learning about just like the world of archetypes. And you see what kind of the father stands for is that order, right? And then when the order disintegrates, then there's chaos, right? But I don't know what I can't put a finger exactly on what conditions surrounding it like led to it being the straight journey forward for me, because it wasn't the same for other people in my family for sure. And so I don't know what it was exactly, but what it felt like was that the spirit of my father that I had codified as a teenager and turned into some unconscious thing that I couldn't really interact with at a deep level. Like, even though my father was there in the material world, my interaction with him was very superficial. Once he died, his spirit jumped inside of me.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
And
That's
that was unique to me. My brother, and that's not to say I didn't have a good relationship with my dad. He was a good friend, very good friend. But when he died, a layer got broken where I could talk to him more deeply, even though he wasn't there. The talk is not the right word, but I think you know what I mean.
wow. Wow. I just, like, I know you don't mean that, like, somehow your dad is one thing and you're another thing and he came inside you after he left his body. I know you don't mean that. Can you say more of what you mean by, like, his spirit jumped inside me?
Yeah, so like by spirit, it's getting at what you and Gage have been kind of putting together with the two worlds and this imaginal or fantastical realm, kind of a gestalt, an emanating spirit, an emanating force that exists that finds its proper tension inside of the material, I guess is the best way I can put it. And my dad had a spirit to him in that sense. He had an emanating force. Um, and he was a therapist. He had a strong spirit too, and how he interacted with us as kids, and that existed inside of me. But I, at the age of 17 years old, 18 years old, like I think a lot of kids do, you you start to try to create your own personality, and you're kind of like a little tyrant in a sense, right? So I was a tyrant, right? And it's right when I was a tyrant that death occurred, right? And then I don't know, I felt like the living spirit of my dad came back that existed in me, that he had both instantiated in me, like growing up, and both me and my brother growing up in our childhood, right? It existed in me, but it was locked away in a part of my brain that I was tyrannizing over, I was
Mm,
controlling, right? something like that. And then with his passing, it's just that frame break that was necessary for me to unlock it. And it wasn't, of course, right after he died that it immediately unlocks a new personality within me. It's a slow journey, but that's been that slow journey that was the kickstart to it for sure.
It's cool how you were brought outside of yourself in a way that helped you make more sense of yourself, kind of like the way we were talking about, because you're acknowledging that. So that spirit from your father was living inside of you, but like you were saying, it was kind of, you were saying like tyrannized, or it was kind of put in a box, or it wasn't expressing itself, and like you knew it was there, which is a really cool thing. Like, and maybe you couldn't have said that before. You wouldn't have maybe even be able to pinpoint that, but now looking back, you pinpointed that it was always there, and it broke forth once he died. And I think that's really interesting. Like I like it's very interesting to me, even like kind of a lot of the way you were describing it kind of reminded me of like the Lion King, in the sense that like Simba like Simba's interaction with his father is very similar to the way that you're talking about it, where it's like you always got this sense that like his father was embodied in him, but there was a part of him that like had to rebel it. And not that saying in rebellious in your situation, but like there was a part of his self that was so strong that's really well characterized in the beginning of the movie, right? And that his self, and that's what leads him to kind of like disobey his father in some sense, like because it's trying to show like that power of the self. And then like, but you never get the sense that like he had to like think back and be like, oh yeah, my father. It's like it was always there, and then it awakened in him. And like even just like the image of like Rafiki kind of pointing that, right, like it's in you, like and that there's like a collapse of your father and yourself into one thing, and that the essential part of you that can embody your father was always in you. And I don't know, I find that really really cool in your scenario, in a way that like not only that happened, but that you've been able to reflect on that, and that you've seems like you've really spent a lot of time thinking about the ramifications of that in terms of how your last 5 years have been. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Well, and I mean, thank you guys for this conversation. Like it's added new articulation to it that you guys know doesn't just exist in my head. Now I've been able to share it. It's through those questions and this atmosphere that I've been able to articulate it even deeper. But I'd say one of the other points where I've had a flash of insight into it is through watching The Lion King, right? It was like 2020, 2 years after it happened, but it's definitely one of those moments where when he sees his dad in the stars, right? You're like, yeah, that's kind of it, right?
Mm.
Yeah, thank you.
That feels like a good place to stop. Thank you for sharing all that, Cameron.
Yeah, guys.
Yeah, that was great.